Hey everyone, it's Draconian Rain, and now that my channel's all sorted out and I fixed up the false copyright claims and those issues and all that stuff, I decided to finally get around to making this particular video. Some people have been asking for a tutorial on how I paint in OpenCanvas, and this isn't exactly going to be a tutorial, but I'm sure you guys can learn something from it. And before I get started, I just want to apologize for any background noises. You may hear my neighbor's dog because I don't have very good soundproofing. It doesn't matter if I shut the doors and windows, you can clearly hear next door's dogs. You can hear my other neighbor on the other side, their pets. They've got chickens and goats, and it's just all kinds of noise going on. And both sides like to argue a lot, so that might even come through in the background, and I apologize, but if I can cut it out and edit those things out, I will. But if I can't, I apologize for that coming through. So anyway, in OpenCanvas, one of the first things I like to do is create a folder specifically for the skin. And I'm sorry for the loud clicking you're about to hear as I type. I don't actually have a microphone stand, so just going to name my folder, and I did that by double clicking the folder. And I usually just end up using a fill type layer kind of thing, and then I will add a masking layer to the folder, because I find this to be a better option than doing a flat silhouette painted layer and then using clipping layers, just simply because of some of the issues it can cause with my painting later on, because I often change my mind and I don't always want to have to go in and repaint tiny little holes in my painting or other little issues that would just be easier if it was actually masked off and I can unmask certain areas or problems. But you'll understand that more as I go along. So I'm going to add a masking layer here, this little white square next to this folder. I'm going to add it here. I'm going to change my pen color to black. I'm just going to grab the default pen. And for anyone interested, I do have my pens and custom pens available for free on my Gumroad. I'm using an Intuos, and that little pop-up menu is a feature of my Intuos tablet. It's part of the hotkeys. I generally use the hotkeys on my tablet rather than the shortcuts, but the shortcut for sizing your brush up and down is the bracket key, and it does it in increments of 5, which is why I tend not to use it. I feel like those increments are just a little bit too large. And you could use a bucket tool, but I've been having some issues with that lately, and that'll probably be fixed in the next patch. So yeah, I'm just masking off this. It's not actually erasing it if you're new to masking, it's hiding it, which is the whole point of masking layers, is to hide areas rather than get rid of them permanently with erasing. And when you're painting skin, this can be especially useful. Like with this particular painting, I'm not actually going to be doing line art like I sometimes would, but instead I'm just going to have more like realism edges along the skin, and sometimes I need to make that wider or slimmer, and it's easier to mask it off rather than erase it completely. And you're gonna hear noises excuse me, you're gonna hear noises in the background a lot too, because I do have pets. I've got like 3 cats. 2 of them aren't mine, I'm looking after them, and 2 Pomeranians, and you might hear the little toes clicking about as they walk around the house. And if I can edit out those noises, I will. And I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little weird. It's Currently we're heading into autumn, and there are just certain things that are in bloom that set my hay fever off, and I just get a little bit croaky and snuffly. I'm probably not going to speed up parts of this video because the whole point is to watch me paint in real time how I do things, and I do work kind of fast sometimes, and it's not something I'm consciously aware of. It's just the speed has come with experience over time. That's good enough. I'm probably going to paint over some of these areas with the hair, but as long as the skin parts are painted mostly to where I need it, that looks fine. So now that this is masked off in the folder, I don't have to worry about clipping. I can just go ahead and add new layers and just start painting, basically. These are a bunch of brushes I have created and customized. When I paint in OpenCanvas, any version actually, when I paint in this program, I paint very similar to how I do in Clip Studio Paint, in that I will stay on the one layer for as long as possible, because some paint brushes work better on a layer that's already got paint. I'll just give a quick example. I'm going to use this thick watercolor brush that I created, and I'm just using light pressure. As you can see, this actually dark pinkish brownish reddish color is coming out quite lightly, but if I went here to this fresh layer, it comes out stronger. Doesn't really look that blended, just kind of looks a bit streaky. And that is the whole reason why I like to stay on the one layer for as long as possible, because I like to blend by painting, not actually by using lots and lots of layers and blur tool and smudge. I like to paint to blend, and that's partly because of coming from traditional media, and partly because my earliest digital art painting experiences were all on Corel Painter, specifically Corel Painter Essentials 4. So early on in learning digital painting and digital art, I learned to blend the paint, and this particular watercolor brush is actually my version of an airbrush. But when I need some hard solid color, excuse me, when I need some hard solid color, I will use a fresh layer with nothing on it, and I'll either use the thick watercolor layer or the thick watercolor pen or extra thick. It just depends on my needs in the moment. And I don't always get my color pick right, so you'll often see me change back and forth. And this painting is no different to my other two videos that I posted about OpenCanvas 7. The main difference between those is those were a voiceover and sped up, and this is real time. And for these hard painted edges, usually I will soften them out with an airbrush, but there are times where it's better to use the blur tool, and sometimes I'll try the airbrush first. I won't like how it looks, and then I'll go back, like I'll undo what I did and go over it with the blur tool, or even the filter up here and just use squash and blur, especially because it's on its own layer. It doesn't matter too much, but mostly I will use a combination of these first two brushes in my brush kit, which, as I mentioned before, is available for download, and it's free. You don't have to pay anything, and I offer them for free because anybody with intermediate experience in this program or most digital art programs should be able to make these brushes. They're not too hard to make, so I'll have a link for that in the description. But anyway, I'm going to start softening with my watercolor airbrush, and again I'm just using my tablet. There's like a scroll wheel here for resizing the brush. I'm just going to soften and blend, and basically I just repeat this process over and over again until I'm satisfied with the results. I'm not doing anything particularly fancy. I will generally add my shadows on a separate layer, and you may hear in quite a few art tutorials that it's a lot easier to start out light first and darken as you go, because it is true, it's very hard to, if you start out dark and you need to lighten, it can be very difficult and cause issues to work in the reverse. It's better if you start light and then go darker as you're creating. And the size, the scroll wheel isn't perfect. Sometimes it jumps huge like that. Whoops. And sometimes when I'm having this almost grey looking appearance while I'm painting, I will generally add a layer on the absolute top of everything, and it'll be an overlay layer, and then just be like a dark red or a dark brown or even a purple kind of color, and I'll go over the top and add in some warmth or cool colors just to kind of change the temperature of the picture a bit. And I don't always like using the default eraser, but instead I will tend to use the paintbrush I'm using, and then I'll come over here to the color wheel, and below these two swatches is a transparent square that changes it to an eraser. So whatever brush you're using can actually become an eraser at any point in time, and it's pretty useful. It can be really helpful at times. Sometimes I'll come in and just color the whole thing over and then change the layer opacity, but not today. Sometimes when I'm pretty satisfied with how it looks, I might merge down. Right now I am not actually satisfied. Instead, I want to just paint and blend some of these edges and colors together, and I'm gonna fix up the way that it's been blended. So I'll just merge them all together, because like I said earlier, sometimes these brushes work better in a one layer painting mode rather than multiple layers. I don't particularly like that area there very much. Those birds are going nuts. I've actually got a new family of birds, and their babies are out hopping about at the moment, so they're making a lot of noise. It's quite nice. It's better than listening to people argue all day. But this is basically it. This is all I do, just a combination of painting and using the airbrush tool, sometimes I'll use the blur tool. It just depends on how everything's blending. Right now I'm using the Alt key to color pick. I'm going to use this pink color for shading. Just get pink hues to her skin. Not really doing anything too fancy or complicated, just trying to keep it simple, which is the best way to paint. And I don't like how the neck's turning out, so I'm actually going to come back in here with the airbrush tool I created and lighten up this dark area to where I want it to be. You can hear cockatoos in the background too. They may get louder as the day goes by because they like to hang out in my tree near the front door, and I'm actually pretty close to the front door. Even though it's closed, they are an incredibly loud bird. I really like the brushes in OpenCanvas. I always have. They're just nice to work with, and they're kind of similar to the ones in Clip Studio Paint too. OpenCanvas has been around much longer, and it was one of my first experiences with a program that was lightweight, because previously everything I've been using was very hard on my system and hard to run, and eventually I bought a copy and I've kept coming back to it just because I enjoy using it. It's always been pretty good to use. Just using the Alt key to color pick because it's quick and easy. I haven't actually put the hotkey on my tablet yet. I used to, but I had to fully reset my tablet recently, so I've lost all my preferences, and out of laziness I haven't fixed it or changed it. And usually when I start doing lips, I'll add a new layer. Then I'll come over here and I'll pick like a orange to orange brown or ochre kind of color. Sometimes I'll keep it a bit red. I'll just do like a quick rough paint like this. Excuse me. And it's usually dodge or linear dodge. Right now I'm going to choose linear dodge. I'm just going to press the delete key, not the backspace key, the delete key, to clear the layer, and do it over again. I'm just going to softly highlight where I want a little bit of light, because I want these lips to look nice and shiny. And I'll generally use just a plain pen and add in some little flicks of light. I used my mouse wheel then to zoom in. I like to come in nice and close when I'm doing these bits of light. And I'm not worried about being accurate or anything, I'm just adding them in wherever it looks nice. I don't particularly care about being realistic, I just want it to be pretty. And I'm sorry if that noise of the tablet is really annoying, but I don't have a microphone stand. So anyway, I'll come back up here to this little airbrush tool and I'll highlight a little bit more. And that's the basic way that I get shiny lips in pretty much every drawing program. I don't really change my method at all. I just really go heavy on this dodge layer. And when I'm happy with it, I'll generally merge it. And then I'll think about shadows and shading at the end. But because I tend to do a bad job on the shadows, I'll usually add them on their own layer. So I've just got a fresh layer after I merged it. Color picked the darkest point of shadow on the skin. I like to have my shadow areas as my main lip color and then darken from there, or change it or pinken it up or something. I just think it looks nicer that way if I color pick from the base shadow, and I feel like it gives more natural looking lips in the end. For these lip shadows, I've just used a pretty saturated color because I really want them to stand out. And then I'm going to turn, whoops, wrong one. Turn off the sketch layer and just have a look. I like how it looks. It's not perfect, but I like it. I'm going to color pick the brightest point and just add in a little bit of light on the edge, which I can always come back and change later. It's a good idea to turn the sketch layer off frequently when you're doing this. And the blur tool isn't its own individual tool along here in general. It's actually in amongst all these pens and whatnot. Or you can just make your own, whatever works for you. These are the moments where I'm more likely to use the blur tool. And sometimes, just like the paintbrushes, it works better if it's on a merged single layer versus a layer that's got some transparency. It can just cause really weird artifacts as well. And that is basically it for how I paint in OpenCanvas. I don't do anything super fancy. I just keep it nice and simple, keep going until I like it, use lots and lots of airbrush, and frequently try to keep a lot of the painting on the one, whoops, went a little crazy there, on the one layer, just simply because I like the way that the paintbrushes blend with paint that's already there. All settings you can change easily. So sometimes my pen doesn't always meet all of my needs, and then I'll basically just come here and down to effect and change these two settings. Quite often I'll basically just invert them, and if I really like it, I'll create a new brush and add it to my set. But frequently what I've made here is all I use throughout my entire painting process, or I use this one, and mostly I tend not to change it at all. I just keep doing the one thing over and over again. using the same set of brushes. I don't always change my painting techniques, but when I'm feeling in the mood for it, I might experiment a little bit, but in general it's kind of just the same thing. I highly recommend getting into the habit of using masking layers because it will make your life so much easier when you're painting. It's nice to be able to paint within this restricted area like that and not have to clip or worry about it being clipped or unclipping. It's easier to organize your layers as well. You can create groups inside of here and not have to worry about adding masking layers to that. Or you can, if you want, you can add some groups, like you might want to add a fresh group layer here within this folder and then mask it off and make the eye painting a little easier or neater. Sometimes I do that, it just depends on what I'm doing or how detailed I'm doing it. I'm not really doing anything too complicated, and that's the way I like to keep it. I often use overlay and linear dodge. I don't often use the color swatches, but I do use the color history. That's better. And I'll like go back to my lightest color and add it to a dodge or linear dodge. Layer blend. Sometimes I'll use screen or lighten. It just depends on how the color reacts, and I'll frequently open this up and just have a look at the preview. Not all programs do it this conveniently. Quite often you have to manually switch the layer blend mode and check it. And if anyone's familiar with my speed paints or shows up to my live streams, you'll see that happen quite a lot, and you'll see me experiment with the way the color behaves with these layer blend modes. Like right now I'm using linear light because I like the way it looks better. And I'm actually going to use the blur tool and soften up. Oops. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to duplicate it and I'm going to soften it, because it'll go too soft and be a little transparent like we just saw briefly. I only want it a little bit softened, and I'll merge that down. When I'm satisfied with it, then I'll come back up here to the airbrush and just fix up the top area a little bit. I like that okay, so I'm going to merge it. All of it, actually. And I'm going to add the eyelashes, and I'm going to use my opaque watercolor because I don't actually want harsh, thick paint lines. I want something that's kind of similar to Photoshop's type of paintbrushes. I'm going to stick to the green like the eye color because I like it. I like when my eyelashes are a darker color of what is in the eye color, if that makes sense. It's just what I like to do lately. And I like that, it's nice and soft. And too, like, you can come here to this little gear icon, click the little gear on the layer, and you can actually, like Paint Tool and Clip Studio Paint, change the way that the paint behaves on the layer. You can change it to a pattern, like screen tones and whatnot, or you can have a watercolor edge, and this is the edge and area of effect and how strong it comes across. I'm not going to do either of those, I'm just going to leave it as is. But those are just some other options to be aware of. I'm going to change this to multiply actually. That's a bird in the background in case anyone's wondering. Pretty sure that's a magpie. They make some really weird noises. It might be a caracal, I'm not sure. They also make some pretty interesting noises. I'm going to colour pick the skin and add it very softly along this bottom part of the eyelashes to create the waterline of the eyes. I'm going to turn off my sketch layer while I do this so it doesn't interfere with my drawing. And because this is a fairly soft brush, it's fairly opaque, it's blending in with the green as it goes, which I like. And it's a paintbrush I use a lot in all of my drawing applications. So yeah, just added a little bit of a waterline. I'm going to come in, colour pick again, brighten up a little bit, and I'm going to go in these areas and fill out the eye a little bit more because I didn't quite do it enough. I'm going to very softly go along the waterline and just kind of blur it out and lighten it up a little bit. And because this is on a single layer, it's also blending in a little bit, and my airbrush tool, as I mentioned, is actually a watercolor tool. So unlike an airbrush which just coats everything, the fact that this is a watercolor brush, it actually blends and smears and smudges as it goes, which I prefer over a standard airbrush. It's just how I like to paint. I like the results better if they can smudge and smear a bit. That's kind of just the basic way that I do eyes, and usually I'll keep going, but not today. I like this unfinished kind of rough and almost dirty paint look. I like it. Normally I wouldn't, but today I'm just in the mood for a little bit of a dirty paint look. Just like I've been doing before, I've just been colour picking with the Alt key. And I've colour picked the eyelashes to match the pupil colour, because I think it looks nice. No particular fancy reason, just other than it looks nice. And I'm going to keep using this fuzzy airbrush watercolor tool just because it's working the best right now for my needs. And I'm gonna add in some little balls of light. Going back to the opaque paintbrush for this one. And much like the lips, I'm going to play with the layer blending modes and preview most or all of them. I like to kind of flash by them. I don't mind screen. Of course, I like linear dodge the best. Vivid light looks interesting. Oh, the rest just aren't very suitable. And I'm gonna duplicate. And with the duplicate, I'm just gonna blur it a little bit, not too much, just enough to add a shiny look to it. And go with 3. And then on the one underneath, it's looking just a little bit too hard, so I'm going to softly blur it, very, very softly. It could be a little bit hard to get the right look. The edges were just a little too hard for my liking. That's just the basic way that I'll add lighting to eyes, and then sometimes I will, on these linear dodge layers, go in with my airbrush or airbrush like tool, and I will just do a bit of a crescent shape here in the underneath part, just to brighten it up a bit, and it can make a huge difference. So just like that, I got nice bright eyes, super bright actually, maybe a bit too bright. It's not easy to get right, but it can be a really nice effect, and sometimes I'll just keep using it and go over other bright areas, try out other colors. Frequently I'll come here to like ears and add it onto ears so it looks like there's some sunlight shining through. Or exposed skin. Give a little bit of a sunbeam look. Some of my favorite areas are the tip of the nose and just this little part here on the forehead. Sometimes under the eyes, it just depends, or sometimes I'll just make a huge brush like this and just go over the top of it like that, just very softly, and just brighten the whole thing, just because it looks nice. Or at least it looks nice to me. Turn my sketch layer back on. I'm not going to merge those for now because I might change my mind. But I am going to draw under them because it'll change the color of my drawing and line art quite noticeably actually. I'm going to use this textured brush I created. My version of a pencil. I feel like that should be redder, so I'm going to lock in the opacity alpha channel actually. Over that colour a bit, and want it to be a little bit more red, even more red. Okay, a little bit more pink to it. Oops, I forgot to turn it off. And because this is underneath all those highlight colors, some areas of this sketch is going to look gradient like that. It's going to have a slight gradient or lightened effect. And I'm going to do the edge of the face a bit. I'm not too worried about the fact that it's getting cut off because it's a masked layer. That sketch is actually there. I've just got to make it visible. So change the color to white. I'm going to use the pencil pen on the mask layer and unhide it so it keeps a textured look. Go back to the previous swatch, and if you make the mistake of changing your swatch color and you want to go back, you do have a color history up here in the swatches. Your layout might not look like mine, but if you go to Window and open the swatches panel here, Control-6 is the shortcut for it, your history will be there and you can just go back. Very useful feature. I use it quite a lot actually, and I'm so happy that Clip Studio Paint finally got it too. That was one of those things in Photoshop that had me keep going back to it. I love having color history. It's very useful. So that's about as much line art as I will generally add. Otherwise I don't really add too much of it. And I'll often use this textured brush to go in and make the skin look a little bit more interesting. Oops, that was wrong hotkey. Sometimes I'll blur out that texture a little bit, depends on my mood. Right now I just want it to look a little bit interesting, so I'm adding some, just scribbling it in so it kind of looks like a pencil has been run over it. And then when I want to do hair, I'll create a new group folder. I try to label my things, but I'm also pretty bad at labeling things. Just trying to think of a hair color I want to do. And do a soft brown. Pretty much the same thing with the skin. I'm going to mask the whole folder layer. Whole folder, I'm going to mask the folder and do the same thing with the layers as I did with the skin. Just to keep everything neat. I don't always do this with hair. A lot of the time I'll just have some clipping layers and some free layers, and I'll just mess around with it until I'm satisfied with it. I tend to do hair differently almost every single time I draw it. It's just whatever I'm in the mood for. And I forgot to change that to a solid black. Don't make my mistakes. You need a black color, and I'm pretty sure the eraser tool actually works as well. Yes, it does. Maybe even the transparent swatch. Yep. Transparent swatch works too. And of course white unhides, so you could use bucket tool, but like I said, I'm having problems with using bucket tool in the masking layer, so I'm not even gonna try. Change that to white, and I'm just gonna paint in my masked hair. I'm actually going to add a little bit of stabilization because my pen is very sensitive and my pen nib is a little bit scratchy from use. I'm not ready to change the pen nib, but it's making my edges look really wobbly. And it can be nice to just turn the stabilizer on and smooth that out. After I finish painting the hair, I'm probably going to just stop the audio there and then speed up the rest of it, because this is all I do for every single part. I don't change my technique, I don't change my method, I don't even change my pens that much, other than what you've seen me use right up to this point. It's just all pretty much the same thing for everything: hair, clothes, skin, eyes, you name it. And like I mentioned earlier, these brushes are available for download, and you can download them from my Gumroad for free. That's my dog clacking around. Probably wondering where I am. Probably put a little picture of him up in the corner of the video. There's a lot of benefits to using masking layers on folders, especially in situations like this. Because I often find myself making mistakes where I need to just expand the cheek area slightly, or the ears, or something like that. I have no idea what my dog's doing, but I'm interested now listening to all those noises. It's not out that often I actually paint a natural hair color, because I like super bright wild hair colors. I just find it more fun to draw. But in moments like this, that's when it is a really good idea to use masking on layers and folders. So I've got everything marked out. I'm ready to get started. I'm going to use a fresh layer so that the color is at its maximum. maximum thickness. I can't really think of an appropriate description, but if I did it on the coloured layer, it would come out just a little bit watery, and I don't want that straight off the bat. I actually want some harsh colours to really define the chunks of hair. I'm trying to keep this kind of cartoony rather than realistic like I normally would. And I'm going to go straight over the top of this with the same colour with an airbrush and soften areas and give it a little bit of a gradient kind of a look. Sometimes I'll just use a gradient tool, but I don't actually like using the gradient tool in OpenCanvas. That's my dog barking. That was Sky. He is probably standing up at the window, barking at things he shouldn't be. And you can hear the other dog, that's Cherry. She's much smaller. They're both Pomeranians. Both had a haircut for summer. They had their last haircut a while ago and it's growing in now, getting ready for autumn and winter. I have no idea what he was barking at. One thing I have trouble with brown hair is accidentally making it look like a tree, and it just starts to look woody, and I'm not always a huge fan of that. Sometimes it looks cool, but I usually get upset and I have to start over. So in those situations I might actually do this all entirely in grayscale and then use a combination of like overlay, levels and color balance to actually get the brown hair that I want. Or I'll use a gradient map and use that to get some nice looking brown hair. Alright, I like that okay. I'm not confident in my airbrushing that I'm about to do, so I'm adding yet another fresh layer. I'm just going to go through and try and soften it in some of the darker areas. And again, I'm just using my tablet's shortcut keys. Sometimes I'm painting in the direction, sometimes I'm not. Looks alright to me. I'm going to add yet another layer. Going to use linear dodge. I'm going to see what the current color looks like. Looks okay. Doesn't look fantastic. Kind of starting to look like ice cream to me. Like some of those ice cream characters that you sometimes see on YouTube. Ice cream and coffee. Some artists have really pretty, really pretty characters. This is kind of reminding me of those kinds of paintings at the moment. Some artists are really good with creamy colors. I don't feel like I am, but I try. And I'm sticking to my watercolor pens because I like the way it blends. And even though I'm not 100% satisfied with this color, there is a way to adjust it, and I'm going to use levels. I'm going to start with the red channel and pay attention to the preview. Oops, too yellow. I kind of want it to stay pink, either pink or a little bit orange. So I'm kind of ignoring the green channel, and then I'll flick preview on and off to see the changes. It's a pretty drastic change. I'm gonna hit OK. And I'm gonna merge the airbrush shadow with the streak shadows. And I'm gonna go over them with some level adjustments too. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start with the red channel. And I'm gonna make it a little bit red. Going to go up with the green a bit so it comes in a little more orangey pink. And oh, the blue wasn't moving at all. I'm gonna increase the blue a little bit. Then I'm going to come back to all three of them, and I'm going to darken it so it's closer to the color I actually want. And this so I'm going to leave that at that. And then at the setting I've already just used, I'm going to reuse it by clicking up here. That way I don't have to change the setting. But I don't like it, so I'm going to just roll it back, press undo, leave it like this. I kind of like it like that. But some of these lines are a little too harsh, so I'm going to go over them with the blur tool and soften them. It looks nice enough to me. And that is it. That's the bare basics of how I paint in OpenCanvas, and hopefully you guys found it helpful. I don't really have a huge amount of advice other than what I've just explained how I paint. I don't really have any interesting tips. This is just one of the ways you can paint in OpenCanvas. There's plenty of other ways. You just basically gotta experiment with it a lot. Find what works for you. This is what works for me personally. I mean, I wish I could give a better tutorial, but I'm not the best or the most experienced, and I don't really have much to share other than technique. And these are just things I've come to prefer over the years. Excuse me. When it comes to painting, I like a soft look. Sometimes I like a natural look. Sometimes I like a realistic look. And right here, right now, is what I was talking about with masking. I can mask that area off, or I can unhide it and just start to make my painting work for me rather than against me. Like here, I'm not going to go too neat, I'm just going to colour in underneath it again. I'm going to go back with the masking and unhide and mask until I get it right. And it's just a nice, oops, wrong colour. Oh no, no, not paying close enough attention. I had the right one the first time. I changed my mind about the earrings. I'm not actually going to add them in. And yeah, this is basically just it. There's nothing super fancy to it. Right now I'm going to use the clip layer because I'm not going to do too much with it. I'm just going to add in some shading and whatnot, and I don't need to worry too much about holes showing up. If I was going to do a more detailed painting of the t-shirt, I would mask off the group layer, but I'm not. I'm just going to keep it nice and simple and flick between the sketch layer so I don't mess up my t-shirt. I'm just making up the t-shirt as I go along. I don't actually have a solid idea of what I want to do. I'm just playing with the colours. Yay! Almost done. This is probably like the longest video I'm gonna have on my channel. If I can add some kind of background music, I will, but I don't want any problems with claims or whatever. So good. I'm going to add a fresh layer, clip it and multiply and lower the opacity a little bit. That's a little bit too dark, and that's it. That's all I do for painting in OpenCanvas 7. And it was probably a year ago now that somebody asked me to do a video on how I paint or try to make a tutorial, and I'm not really the greatest person to ask for a tutorial on painting and like how to paint, but I'm more than happy to share my techniques. But yeah, this is it. This is all I do. I just tend to stick to these brushes and don't really veer too much away. I really like this brush that I made because it's nothing more than a simple spotty scatter pen, and if you do this you can create some really interesting textures and whatnot. It's actually pretty good for drawing trees and clouds, and if I changed it to a smudge tool it'd be pretty interesting too. I might actually do that now. I'm going to duplicate it, go into the settings, I'm going to call it pencil smudge. So I know, change the kind to fingertip. Close that. So it's turned into a smudge tool now. And it's not working. Not working how I expected it to. Probably because it's got no effect. So there we go, now it's working. Try it on 30%. Oh, close to 30. Close enough. So yeah, and there's that. Turned it into an interesting smudge tool. I think that's a really fun pen to use. I like the smudge tool in this program. It can be very entertaining. Yeah. Makes for pretty good clouds, actually. And if I made the texture better than this, it'd probably have a better fuzzy look to it as well, but I haven't really done too many smudge tools at all. But yeah, that's it. That's all there is to it. Just keep at it, keep painting, keep trying, try new things, try new pens, try other ways to paint, and just keep going, just keep trying. And if you can, try and save the event files and re-watch them yourself, watch yourself paint, see where you might be going wrong, see what you might be able to change, try and learn about your own habits. Sometimes it can be easy to use an event file rather than try to record yourself, and you can learn an awful lot from it. I know I certainly did, and OpenCanvas really changed my overall art and how I paint, and it's definitely contributed to the kind of artist I've become over the years. So that's it. That's all I do. And if I can come up with a better tutorial, I will, but it probably won't be anytime soon. So yeah, that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time with hopefully a proper tutorial.